Today we are interviewing Colonel Arthur Fiedler, a veteran of World War II in Vietnam. We are interviewing Colonel Fiedler in his home in Oxnard, California. Today's date is August 8th, 2014. This interview is part of the Veterans History Project and will be retained in the Library of Congress. Colonel Fiedler, please state your full name, date, and place of birth.
Okay, my name is Arthur Charles Fiedler, was originally Junior. I was born on August 1st, 1923 in the city of Oak Park, Illinois, which is just west of Chicago.
Well, congratulations, you had a birthday just last week.
Yes, 91.
91 last week. Could you give us a little information about your family background, education, and early childhood?
Yes, my family origin is basically German and Danish. My mother's family came from Denmark, and they arrived over here in 1892. My father's family was all German. He arrived here in 1880, married my grandmother, who's from East Prussia, in 1888, and they raised their family from then on. Of course, my mother and father were both born here in America. Most of my life, from the age of 4 on, was spent in Maywood, Illinois. I went to a grammar school called Irving, and my high school was in Proviso. I started music training. My mother's father had been in the music line. He was a conductor of a, I guess they call him a pit orchestra back in the days when there were no talkies, the movies were silent. And he directed supposedly the largest theater in Chicago. He was the pit orchestra director. And so my mother felt that I should emulate him and be a violinist. Well, I started learning to play the violin in 6th grade. Went on through high school. I ended up in high school studying under the Chicago Symphony, Dr. Ludwig Becker. My memory gets a little tight on that.
No problem.
He was the concertmaster of the Chicago Symphony, and I also played with the Chicago Conservatory of Music. And my folks expected me to have a musical career. It didn't work out that way, though. After I graduated from high school, I had an opportunity to become an electrician apprentice. And I took that particular job.
Before we talk about your military career, did you have any other family members serve in the military?
Oh yes, my father was in the Army, was over in France. My uncle was in the...
World War I.
Pardon?
Would have been World War I.
Yes, oh, I'm sorry, sure. Did you want to know that?
Sure.
Yeah. My uncle got in a little later than my father and never went overseas. My grandfather on my mother's side was also in the Army. And on my wife's side, she had 6 uncles that all went to France, and they were all wounded, unfortunately. One of her uncles was caught in a gas attack. He almost died. Another one was in a third story. He was working as an observer, and the building was shelled, and he fell down from the third story. And I don't know what the other man, I don't know his story, but he was in a VA hospital the rest of his life. So yes, we had people in the service.
Yes, you did. So how did you became out of high school? You became an electrician apprentice. Did you go to college?
No. Nobody had gone to college in my family, and I don't think there was money enough to have sent me to college. My dad was a postman. He carried mail, and I have to tell you truthfully, there was never any consideration of going to college.
Your wife says she made you go.
Yes.
So what, you didn't go to college, you're an electrician apprentice, so how do you get interested in the military? And how did you get in the military?
Okay, when I was 7 years old, a military pilot and his family moved in across the street. They had a son by the name of Jimmy, my age, and he was in my class, so we became good friends. And I always remember in the summertime when we had vacation, his father used to come one day a week, weather permitting, and he would come right over the house and buzz it real low, make about 2 circles, and there was a vacant lot beside Jimmy's house, and there used to be all the kids in the neighborhood and a couple of the wives, and they'd be waving towels, pillowcases, sheets, anything. And I can remember I used to look at him flying there, and I thought, oh my God, he's just like a bird. He can fly anywhere he wants, anytime he wants. Well, then when school started in September, we had one of those epidemics of chicken pox, and I was one of those caught. And when I came out, incidentally, I don't know if you know this, but in those days, if you had a childhood disease, your home was quarantined. Nobody could go in and nobody could go out. And by the time I got out, I was surprised to find that Jimmy's family had moved away. But I was now very interested in aviation. I read everything I could. I eventually ended up reading about World War I, and those were, in my opinion, the real heroes, flying in flimsy crates made of wood and some kind of a linen covering. And if they got in combat, neither the Allies or the Germans in the beginning would let the pilots wear parachutes. And I was told that the reason for that was that they were afraid if they got into a tight situation, they'd just bail out and leave the airplane crash. And this way they felt with no parachute, they'd have to fight like the Dickens. And the problem was if the airplane caught fire, they were dead. They had 3 choices. They could jump out of the airplane, they could take their service revolver, commit suicide, or they burned up alive. So those men were really heroes.
I agree with that totally. So you were interested in aviation at an early age. So how did you get in the military? Were you drafted? Did you volunteer?
Well, after all of what I told you before, my impossible dream, my secret dream, was to be a fighter pilot. And of course my family all poo-pooed that and said, oh, you're going to be in a musical career. Well, it didn't work out, and I frankly thought I was never going to have a chance to be a fighter pilot. And then December 7th came along, and I realized my impossible dream might become a possible dream. Well, the Air Force dropped the requirement for 2 years of college to be a cadet. about April something. Anyway, on the 28th of April, I went down to Chicago and enlisted.
What year?
This is 1942, and if I remember correctly, there were about 33 of us that took the written exam. 6 of us passed that, and then in the afternoon we had a physical exam. 2 of us passed that, and at 3:30 that afternoon I became a private in the United States Army Air Corps.
Okay, tell us about maybe you can remember about your basic training, and then was that an aviation cadet program?
Yes.
Okay, so you went into aviation cadets, and what base, and then tell us some incidents about that.
Okay, well, I told you I was enlisted on the 28th of April. I was told that I'd be recalled, or rather I would be called up in 30 to 60 days. Well, because we didn't have the material, we didn't have the facilities, we didn't have the instructors available, I didn't get called up until the 26th of October, almost 6 months later. Now, the first place we were sent to was classification at Nashville, Tennessee, and that was to determine whether you're going to be a pilot, bombardier, navigator, or none of the above. And I was found to be pilot qualified. So the next place we went to was Montgomery, Alabama, Maxwell Field, and this is where we did all our academics. Everyone tried to say that these were equivalent to college courses, but I didn't learn anything there that I didn't already know from high school, except we had some unusual, I'll call them courses. We were put in a darkened room, and a airplane would be flashed on the screen at 1/25th of a second, and we had to identify that, and your grade depended on how many airplanes you identified correctly. They also used to flash numbers on there, up to 7 numbers, which you had to be able to identify what the numbers were. And again, your grade depended on how many mistakes you made or how accurately you were.
Did they give you any training to do this, or is this just initial training?
I don't think anybody had ever known about this particular, I'll call it course, if you will. Anyway, we had a terrific physical training program. In fact, the majority of us felt we were being trained for the infantry, not the Air Force. We had 5-mile runs at a trot and shorter runs at pretty high speed. Anyway, we probably lost a few due to academics at Maxwell. I was then sent to Avon Park, Florida, the Lodwick Military Aviation Academy, and in that was a primary training. I flew a PT-17, which is a biplane. It had about a 220 or 250 horsepower engine. We got 60 hours there. The thing that really astounded me was when we finished, our instructor told us that 63%, that's almost 5 out of 8 people, were washed out. So we felt very fortunate. In there had been originally 4 people the instructor had, and 3 of them got through. From there I was sent to Macon, Georgia. Can't remember the name of the field. I flew the BT-13. Now that was a 450 horsepower engine, and we were able to put the prop in high pitch and low pitch, which was a first for us. The primary trainer couldn't do that. I have to tell you that there wasn't a thing we did in the BT-13 that wasn't accompanied by a checklist. I get out to the airplane, there's the pre-flight checklist. You get up on the wing, there's the before entering cockpit checklist. You get into the cockpit, there's the cockpit checklist, the engine start checklist, after engine start checklist, before taxi checklist. It went on and on and on. And unfortunately, a lot of the people couldn't do that memorization. And I know one that washed himself out because it was so bad. That was the first time that we ended up with all military instructors. I should have told you in primary, all our instructors were civilians, and we had about 4 or 5 first lieutenants, second lieutenants on the field who administered check rides on the 20, 40, and 60-hour point. I don't know whether I should go back and tell you that 2 of us ended up having to give a visiting general a check ride so he could see how well we were doing. This is kind of comical. I have to tell you about this.
Please do.
After I gave him the ride, he said, well, go over and land at an auxiliary field for me. So I went over and landed at the auxiliary field, and he said, well, I want to get out and have a cigarette. So we got out, and he said, well, mister, that was a pretty good ride. He said, you have only one problem. And of course I was crestfallen. Oh my God, what did I do wrong? And I said, may I ask what the problem was, sir? And he said, yes. He said, do you remember I asked you to give me a steep turn to the right? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, you had all the controls whipped over for the steep turn to the right when we were still flying straight and level. He says, you've got to move the controls slowly and you'll be a much better pilot. He said, did you ever touch a woman's leg? And I'm thinking, what, my God, what's this going to be? And I said, well, yes, sir, I did. He said, did it have a silk stocking on it? And I said, yes, sir. He said, did you tear the silk stocking? And I said, no, sir. He said, you see, that's the way it is in flying. It's seduction, not rape. Move the controls slowly. There were 2 of us that gave the general a ride, and we apparently did well because the commandant, the military commandant, thanked us. Unfortunately, the other gentleman that gave the general the ride got killed in basic. And let's see now, I told you we flew the BT-13, we had all these checklists. I want to tell you about my night flight. Basic was where we first learned how to fly the airplane at night. And what happened is this instructor, the only instructor that I had who was British, met us at noontime and said, we will leave here at about 5 o'clock. I'll go over to an auxiliary field with you. You'll make 3 night landings with me in the back seat, and then you will make 3 night landings solo, and you'll be checked out for night flying. Well, we went over to this place, and it certainly wasn't used very often because the oats or wheat or whatever was about 3 feet high, and there were 2 searchlights that were set up on the approach end, and all they did was light the approach end of the field in. And I can remember I was the first one. The instructor said, "All right, Fiedler, let's go." So we get in the airplane. I take off. My landings weren't landings, they were crashes. I couldn't tell where to level off. 3 feet up and down into the grass and so forth. Anyway, we went all 3 landings, and then he says, "Taxi over to the tee." We get over the tee, and he gets out, and he said, "Okay, you make your 3 landings." And I said, no, sir, I'm not ready. I don't want to do this. I can't do this, sir." And he said, "Look, mister," he said, "I survived the Battle of Britain." And he says, "My idea of living to an old age is not sitting in the back seat of a BT-13 while you chaps attempt to make night landings. Now, off you go." Well, let me tell you, I was really terrified. I couldn't believe it. So I called for instruction to take off. I got my instruction to take off. And I came around on my first landing, and I couldn't believe it. The field, when I was supposed to be about 5 or 10 feet over the beginning of the field, I was 50 or 60 feet high. And I couldn't believe it. I wasn't, it's obvious I wasn't going to land, so I gave the power and went around, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be flying up here all night till I run out of fuel, and I'm going to crash. I got down on the downwind leg, and I hear a voice over the radio that says, "I say, old chap, if you want to get that kite down tonight, take the power off on the next landing." And of course, we always landed with no power, to bring the throttle all the way back, and you come in, and my problem was that I was so dang terrified that I left part of the power on, and of course then your rate of descent's much less. If I hadn't gone around, I'd have crashed a grove of trees at the end. And believe it or not, I made the next 3 landings were pretty good landings. And finally on the 3rd landing he said, "Okay, old chap, bring it over here and we'll let somebody else have a whack at it." And that was my night checkout.
Well, those are interesting stories about pilot training, and thank you for sharing them. What did you do after pilot training?
After I finished advanced, and advanced was down in...
okay, I'm sorry. I skipped one part then. That was basic. So then you went to advanced.
Advanced at Marianna, Florida. Had an interesting situation there. All the B-17s were raiding the continent and having very light losses, and in basic we had to opt whether we opt for either single engine or multi-engine training. And now, because the B-17s were having such light losses, most of the people at basic were saying they wanted multi-engine training, and we weren't getting enough people for fighter pilot training. So myself and another cadet and our instructor were called into the commandant, and we were told we were going to fly back to basic and put on a demonstration for the students, and then we were to go around to all the stages and try to tell all the students what a great job flying a fighter airplane was. And that's exactly what happened. The only thing I'm going to say is that my instructor should not have been an instructor. He should have been a fighter pilot, because he had us flying so close to him, I was afraid we were going to take off his tail with our prop. And he had us perform a real fine job of acrobatics and everything. And when we got down, we start talking to the people in the stages, it didn't matter what I said. They all said, no, when I finish, then I probably get a chance to have a job in a commercial airline. And finally, nobody had told us what a great job we had done. So finally I asked one of the guys, said, well, what did you think of the performance that we had? He said, well, actually, the only thing that most of us noticed was that you were running the throttles up and down, which put the prop in high pitch and low pitch, and he said the din was absolutely unbelievable on the ground. He said, we thought we were going to go crazy listening to all that. So much for that. I finished on the 28th of July, 1943. Goodness, my wife, my family came down for my graduation. I have to tell you this, that my wife, to earn some extra money, had been babysitting, and on the way back she told me she had been babysitting for a famous American airline pilot named High Sheridan, and that High Sheridan had been a World War I fighter pilot. When she told him that I was graduating as a fighter pilot, he told her that she had to make an appointment for me to get together with him and talk with him. And I don't know if you can understand, my heroes were World War I fighter pilot, and to find one that was alive and I could talk with him was incredible. Anyway, we went over and talked with him, and the stuff I learned from him saved my life. He would tell me about his experiences, what it was that he wanted me to be aware of, like, you know, you always try to dive out from the sun. If you can't dive out from the sun, you try to go behind them, get below them and pull up on their tail so they don't see you. And the other thing that he really wanted me to follow was look around all the time. His comment to me was, you can be flying the best fighter plane in the world. If you don't look around, some enemy pilot flying the worst fighter pilot in the worst fighter plane in the world can sneak up on your tail and blow you away. So I followed his advice, and someone told me I was a legend in the officers club in combat, because everybody was asking me if they could fly with me, because nobody believed that I was looking around as much as I was. And the other thing that he told me, and this is the thing that really saved my life, he said, the easiest time to shoot an enemy airplane down is when he is trying to shoot one of our airplanes down. He said he can't be looking around checking his back. He's got to be concentrating on the airplane ahead of him, and you can just sneak right up on his butt and blow him away. So he says, I want you to promise me that if you ever find yourself about to attack an enemy airplane, you will go ahead and check your tail first and be sure there's not an enemy airplane waiting to blow you away.
Check your own six.
And it happened twice. So I feel, you know, no question, he saved my life. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so this was advanced. Are we?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have just become a pilot when I talked with High Sheridan. I was sent to Richmond, Virginia. I flew the P-47. I was there for about 3 months, and then about 40 of us were sent to Dover, Delaware, where we became instructors. And I already told you that.
Tell me again.
About getting married.
Well, tell us again.
Oh, well, When we got up there, the base commander met us in the theater and told us that we would not be sent to combat. We would be, for the rest of the war, we would be there instructing. My wife and I had become engaged earlier, but we agreed we weren't going to get married until at least I came back from combat. So now I wrote her a letter, told her what happened, asked her whether she thought we should get married or not. The verdict was yes, and that we should get married on the 24th of December that year. Well, that's what we planned on. However, on the 10th of December, I noticed my name on the bulletin board that said I was going down to Bryan, Texas for the instrument school. Well, I went in and talked to the squadron commander and said, well, you're going to have to get somebody else to do that because I'm getting married on the 24th. And he said, well, you're not getting married here. You may get married in Bryan, Texas, but you're going to Bryan, Texas. And it became a rather hostile conversation. And he kept giving me a rough time and saying, well, maybe this means you shouldn't get married. And as we talked, and I got angrier and angrier. And finally he just flat said, hey, you're going, face it. Now get the blank out of here. So I told Helen that I would stop in Chicago on the way to Bryan and explain the situation. I got to Chicago on the 14th of December at 7 o'clock in the morning, called my mother up, who was working for my grandfather because help was hard to get in the war, during the war. And she said, hurry up over here, you're going to get married tonight. And I said, I can't get married, there's no dependents allowed down there. She said, everything's all set up. And in reality, they had short-circuited the 3-day wait. And the long and the short is, at 8:30 that night, I was a married man. And we went down, she insisted she was going to go down to Bryan, Texas with me. And I told her they weren't authorized. And she said, well, she's coming anyway. Anyway, we went, we finished the school 30 days, went back to Dover, Delaware. And that was when she started getting morning sickness. And we realized she was pregnant. Then we got the other shock.
Still in the P-47?
Yes, I'm instructing.
And you're still instructing in the P-47, and you're not going to combat?
Yes. And then the other shock came when it said, we're closing down the school here, and the first contingent of you, 24, will be going overseas very shortly. So I had to send Helen back to her parents, pregnant, back to her parents. And on the 25th of April, I departed from Newport News, I believe is the port down there. And 8 days later, we arrived at Oran in North Africa. Now I had my choice then of flying P-38s and P-51s, but I already had 360 hours of P-47 time, and I wanted to fly P-47s. And the guy said, well, the best I can do is send you to the organization that is still flying P-47, but they're also transitioning to P-51. And that's how I got sent to the 325th Checker Tails.
And let's see, this was April of 43? What?
No, this is May. This is the end of May. Do you want me to tell you about the 325th?
Yes.
Okay, the end of May we arrived there. I flew my first combat mission on the 13th of June. And my airplane, I was assigned an airplane, a P-51C. And the difference between the B and the C was only that they were made in different cities. On the 30th of June, I came out to my airplane, and at this time I had 2 victories, and here was a brand new D model with Helen's name on it and my 2 victories on it. And fantastic. It had 6 guns instead of 4 guns. I could look around behind me and check my tail without having to look around both sides. Fantastic airplane. It's interesting. I never had a chance to fly it except in combat. The first time I flew it was in combat.
Was this 1943?
No, this is 1944.
44. This is after D-Day.
After what?
This is after D-Day.
No, D-Day is in December, or in June.
June of 44. This is after D-Day or the year before?
No, I graduated as a pilot in 43. 3 months at Richmond while I checked out in the 47. Then from November to April, I was up at Dover, Delaware. November 43 to April of 44,
okay,
when I went overseas. And I joined the 325th in 44.
Very good.
Now, do you want, I flew a total of 66 missions, although my Form 5 says that I flew 69. Officially, I'm credited with 66. I never noticed the difference until I retired, and then it was too late to do anything. I flew 337 hours of combat. Our average mission was right at 5 hours and 10 minutes. I am credited with 8 confirmed victories, 1 confirmed probable. Unofficially, I know I got 11, but we had very strict rules as to how to claim a victory, and the other 3, well, one of the other 3 was the probable, who was on fire, losing coolant, and heading straight down at 15,000 feet, and I know that he didn't make it. But it doesn't matter. 8's okay too.
Could you tell us what your typical mission was? Were you sent up to engage fighters? Were you sent up to escort bombers? What was your typical mission, or was there more than one kind of mission?
About 85% of my missions were escort missions. Most of the bombers were B-24s. We had 1 group of B-17s. I'm going to say something between 5 and 10% of our missions were what we call fighter sweeps, and this is where we didn't have bombers to escort. Our primary mission was to go in like 15 minutes ahead of time and try to catch the Germans taking off, forming, climb to higher altitude. It was strictly a hunting mission, and about 5% were strafing missions. Let me ask you a question.
That's the picture. I want to know that story.
Yes. Would you like to hear the story of this one?
Well, we would love to hear all of your stories of your victories.
Okay.
But if you can't tell them all, or don't want to tell them all, certainly this one.
Well, on the, as I said, the 13th of June was my first mission. On the 24th of June, I got the probable. 4 days later, we had a fighter sweep to Ploesti. Now, Ploesti was a hotbed because this was the major source of natural oil that the Axis had. And so they always sent up 100-200 airplanes or whatever they had left, and at the end, they didn't have that many left. But this is on the 28th of June. Our 3 squadrons are on a fighter sweep. My squadron is at 24,000 feet. just below an overcast. The other two squadrons are up at 30,000 feet above the overcast. I have to guesstimate that about 20 miles to the west of Ploesti, the radio suddenly blared forth, Boku 109s, 30 Angels, which means, hey, there's a lot of 109s up here at 30,000 feet. Well, the squadron commander said, drop tanks, and immediately went balls to the wall. Now, balls to the wall are prop and throttles had little rubber balls about an inch in diameter, and we would grab the rubber balls, and full forward was the firewall, so balls to the wall meant full power. Well, everybody started climbing up, but my left drop tank hung up, and I didn't want to be getting into combat with a hung up, half-used drop tank. So I did everything I could to get rid of that tank, and finally I ended up having to jerk my stick back and fire my guns at the same time. The tank came off, but now my squadron had disappeared into the overcast. So I now go balls to the wall, and I start up after them. I was amazed to find out this wasn't a solid overcast, it was a layered overcast. A layer of clouds, a layer of clear, a layer of cloud. Well, every time I came to the clear, I'd quick look left and right because I didn't want to run into my squadron. And about 27,000 feet, as I looked to the left, I spotted two airplanes. Well, before I could stop my climb, I was in the next clear space, but I went down through the clouds, and by the time I came out, I was close enough to these two airplanes to see the two oil coolers under each wing, and I knew they were 109s. Well, the normal situation is the leader is the best pilot, so I decided I'm going to blow the leader away and then I'll take on the wingman. Well, as I got about 200 yards away from him, they were flying like this, and all of a sudden the wingman looks like that, and I know that he spotted me and he's trying to decide what I am. Well, I changed my procedure when immediately went over, put my sight in front of him, opened fire on him, and I got to tell you, this guy was really sharp. I had bullets all over his airplane, but the first bullet no sooner hit than he whipped it over like this and started down to the ground, five miles below us. Well, he twisted, he turned, he skidded, he did everything to make sure that I couldn't get a sight on him. And I had no way of knowing where he was going to be in 1 second, so I didn't fire. I just followed him while he's doing all these contortions. And about 13,000 feet, he pulled out, and I was in a great position, and I opened fire on him again. And this time, of course, there were a lot of hits on him again. And instead of flipping over this time, he immediately started burning, and the left wing slowly dropped, and as the left wing dropped, the nose came. And the next thing I know, we're in a vertical dive again. Well, we flew, I didn't tell you this, but our range, we flew like 600 miles from our base, and you could never tell what the height of the ground was, and I didn't want to be at the speed we were hitting. I didn't want to follow him, have him crash into the ground and suddenly realize that I was too low and crash behind him, victor and vanquished, both dead. So at about 5,000 feet, I pulled off and cocked it up on the wing while I watched him. And sure enough, he crashed down there, and big column of smoke came up. Now, I had just had this probable 4 days beforehand, and I think, well, by God, I'm not going to get a probable on this. So I went down, turned my guns off, and took pictures of them to prove that I had a victory. I started to pull up, and I started to climb. I couldn't believe it. A 109 came right around in front of me. Obviously, I think he was looking at the guy like I had been. Well, I immediately flipped my guns on, went into a vertical bank, and got behind this guy and opened fire on him. And I don't know, there were hits along the side of his airplane. Maybe 6, 10 hits, something like that. And now I'm having to pull a lot of G's to stay behind him. And all of a sudden my guns quit firing. And that was one of the problems with the C's and the B model too. If you pulled a lot of G's and fired the gun, the way the ammunition came to the guns, it couldn't pull another cartridge into the breech. And so you're sitting there with 4 guns that none of them fire. Well, unfortunately, I don't know, he was now like this, and I pulled up. I was so close to him that I couldn't help getting in formation with him. And we sat there. I'm about 40, 45 feet from him. He's looking at me. I'm looking at him. I didn't remember a thing about that airplane, except I knew what the color of his helmet was a rust color, and I knew what his oxygen mask looked like. It was really tunnel vision. Well, I didn't know what to do. Anything I do, dive, climb, he's going to get a chance to shoot at me with his 20-millimeter cannons. And I'm adverse to 20-millimeter cannons hitting my airplane when I'm in it. So I don't know how long we flew there. It seemed forever, but I'm sure that it was probably a minute. And I suddenly decided, well, the only thing I can do is I'm going to take my .45 out and I'm going to start shooting at him, and I'm going to hope that he's not going to let me shoot at him from 40 feet away, and I'm hoping that he's going to turn away and I'm going to turn away in the other direction and head for home as fast as I can. Well, as I started to pull my .45 out, I couldn't believe it. He jettisoned his canopy and he bailed out. When I got home and reported this, some smart person said, "Oh, Svengali, you hypnotized him and he bailed out." But I didn't hypnotize anybody else, so that was a short-term nickname.
So you got credit for a kill and you never fired a shot?
Oh, I'm sorry. When he bailed out, I went down and took a picture of him too, because I wanted to get credit for the two.
Could you tell us about any of your other victories?
Sure.
Good.
My third victory was on the 9th of July. Again, a fighter sweep over Ploesti. And as we were approaching Ploesti, the group, nobody had spotted any airplanes, so we broke into flights of 4. And I was with Colonel Green. I was his wingman. And as we got closer and closer to Ploesti, and the bomber stream was down below us, we suddenly saw 7 109s that were doing the yo-yo off of the bomber. They get up here, go down, make an attack, pull up, come around and pull up. Well, we immediately headed for them, and I don't know whether the radar reported them or they saw us, but all of a sudden they quit attacking the bombers and started going to the northeast and climbing. Now, the bombers were at about 24,000 feet, and of course we dove down to that altitude, and when the Germans started climbing, They got to 30,000 feet, and that was where we were at our best compared with the enemy aircraft. And we got up to 30,000 feet, and they all suddenly decided, I guess, every man for himself, because they all started flipping and going split-essing, except the man on the right. And the man on the right turned, and he started climbing more steeply than before. And I looked at him, and I thought, this SOB is going to get away. And I did the unthinkable. I left my leader, because I said, no, he's not going to get away. And so I started turning in at him. I started firing at 90 degrees off of him, and about 60 degrees, I got so many hits on him, I thought somebody else was also there shooting at him. His right gear came on down, the canopy came off, a big rectangular object came down from his engine. For years I thought that I had shot his engine out. I'm still not really sure, but I think it was probably more logical that I shot the cowling off. But I really don't know. He was streaming coolant, but it was amazing to me that he didn't catch fire. And I later found out that above 30,000 feet there wasn't enough oxygen to sustain a fire. Anyway, he slowed down so much that I passed him pretty fast on the left, and I couldn't tell whether there was anybody in the airplane or not. But since he had flipped his canopy off, I presume that somewhere along the line he jumped out. I don't know. That was my third one. Then on the 26th of July, we were escorting the 55th Bomb Group, which was B-24s. And as we came up over Italy, there was an overcast below us all the way to the Alps. And by the time we hit the Alps, they started getting holes in them. And I'm not really sure how far past the Alps we were, but I looked down and I couldn't believe it. I spotted 64 German airplanes. Now, the only reason I know there's 64, we're at 28,000 feet or so, and there's 8 in a row and 8 rows. I subsequently am told that probably the last 3 rows were at a higher altitude, but from my perspective, they're 10, 11,000 feet below us. You can't tell. Anyway, I called out bogeys 9 o'clock. I made a mistake. I should have called 9 o'clock low, because some of the people told me they couldn't, I don't spot any bogey, and others said, oh, they're P-51s. And I said, well, I never saw P-51s fly a formation like that. And about that time, somebody came in and said, they got to be 51s. 2 51s just came off of them. Those 2 51s were Focke-Wulfs. We later found out after the war that when you're more than a mile away, you recognize the airplane mostly by wingtips. And the Focke-Wulf 190 had square wingtips like the 51. Hard to believe, but we mistook P-47s for 109s, vice versa, and the 190s for P-51. Well, I'm relatively new. I can't question when everybody's telling me that they're P-51s. I can't question that. So I keep well, I'm sorry, we were in a big hole in the overcast. They went under the overcast, and we're gradually overtaking a wing of B-17s. And I'm watching the B-17s because I don't think these are really American airplanes, but everybody else seemed to think so. And all of a sudden, 17s are exploding, they're catching on fire, and I look behind them, and here comes these, I thought, 64 Focke-Wulfs. Turns out there were 20 of them, and the others were 109s. And so I remember the stupid thing I said, they're bogeys, they're hitting the 17s, I'm gone. And with that I went over. And unfortunately they were right, oh man, pretty close. I was afraid that I was going to crash into one of them. I started shooting as soon as I got my sights on them, hoping that I could hit a couple of them and that would make them stop firing and they would break up. And in fact, the second guy in the first row and the fifth guy in the first row, as I'm coming down and shooting my guns like that, both of them pulled up. I've got enough speed now, I'm going to yo-yo off of them. I'm going to go up and then I'm going to come down and shoot and so forth. Well, as I got up to the top of my yo-yo and I started down, I looked over there and here's another Focke-Wulf. So I think, well, I'm going to polish him off first and then I'll go down. Well, as I started over towards him, he obviously saw me because he flipped into a vertical bank. And as he flipped over, I pulled up like this, and as he comes over below me, I'm going to drop down on his tail and blow him away. Only he didn't come down. And so now I look and I go over more to the inverted position, and guess what I see? I see a Focke-Wulf coming right at me, and his guns on the wings are blinking, and those are blinking. And I think, how in the dickens could he have gotten to that position? Well, he whipped by me and rolled over for a dive, and I whipped over right after him. And we started on down, and golly, I don't know how far we went down. Let's see, probably about 8,000 feet, 7,000 feet, and all of a sudden he pulls out. This is where I got caught, because as he pulled out and as I pulled out, he can pull out to the point that he's barely blacking out. I pull out, and every time I get to the point that I'm blacking out, I got to let pressure go so I can make sure that he's still ahead of me. Well, about the third time I went to the blackout and had to release the pressure, I look up and here's a Focke-Wulf coming down at me, firing at me, and I'm thinking, how could that guy have gotten turned around in a matter of about 4 seconds? And well, as soon as he started firing at me, I started firing at him, and he went on straight on down, and I, of course, went on down after him. We did this 3 times, and we get down to the point that let's see, we're like 1,200 feet above the ground, and I'm closing on the first guy, and I remembered High Sheridan's advice, and I looked to the behind me, and I couldn't believe it. Here came another Focke-Wulf, not more than 100 yards from me, and I now did well, it gets complicated. I did a sloppy barrel roll. He passed me by, and I was on his tail. He made a right turn. We were now in a valley at like about 50 to 100 feet. He made a right turn. I put my pipper ahead of him, gave him a blast, and hit him right away because he snap rolled to the right, and then almost immediately ran into the other side of the canyon wall.
Okay, I believe we were just talking about your fourth victory.
Yes, well, actually, when I shot this man down and he crashed into the canyon wall there, I realized that instead of one Focke-Wulf, I had been fighting two Focke-Wulfs all the time. So that the pilot that I thought was a superhuman pilot was actually two pilots. Well, after he crashed into the wall, I was now going to go after the second pilot, but I couldn't find him. I thought surely he must be up the canyon, because we'd been making quite a bit of airspeed. We were probably doing at least 400. Anyway, I decided he had to be ahead of me, so I went up the canyon, probably for about a mile, mile and a half, and it came into a big open area, canyons coming in. And I'm looking around for him, and I can't see him, and all of a sudden, over a little hill, an airplane comes, and I said, ah, there he is. And so now I figure we're going to make a head-on pass. And I have to tell you, I would have shot this guy, at this guy anyway, except I heard a voice that said, if that's a P-51 coming towards me, waggle your wings. Well, of course, I then suddenly realized, my God, that's a 51. Waggle my wings. And then we joined together. And it was Lowry, one of our top aces. And he had just been in a fight up another canyon. So we started climbing, and we got to 11,000 feet, and all of a sudden, Lowry pitched down like this, and I, of course, followed him down. And I looked below us, and there was a cloud of black smoke, and at the head of it was an ME-109. Well, when they use what they called MW50, this is a methyl and water solution that they inject to the engine. It gives them added power, but produces a long trail of smoke. Well, poor Wayne, he got up right behind this guy, opened fire on him, and fired about 3 rounds from each machine gun, and he was out of ammunition. So I'm right behind him, and he says, he's all yours, you lucky SOB, but he didn't say SOB. So I pull up behind this guy. I open fire, and I see one hit on the left side of his airplane right behind the cockpit, and there's an explosion. And I thought, boy, that's pretty lucky. One shot and it exploded. And then the fire from the explosion suddenly just stops. And Lowry says, hit him again, hit him again. You didn't get him. So I come up this time, and I open fire, and I get a lot of hits on him. We're 10 feet, 15 feet above the ground, and this guy elects to bail out. His airplane is completely on fire, and he bails out. And I can't believe it. I see this body hit the ground, hit again, and it looks like he's coming right over my wing, but it's an optical illusion. He's at the edge there. And his third bounce, he bounces into the flaming wreckage of his 109, which has crashed. You know, one of the things I liked about the Air Force was I didn't have to see all the blood and the guts. We all felt it was bird against bird, airplane against airplane, not so much man against man. Periodically, of course, we get to see them in their parachute, but to see this poor guy bouncing along the ground and into the wreckage of his airplane, that was kind of mind-boggling. And about this time, because his airplane had exploded the second time again and became a mass of fire, I got oil all over my airplane, and as I'm contemplating what he's just done, my engine starts going brrr, brrr, brrr. I've got oil that's come down into the engine, and I think, God is punishing me for having killed somebody. I can remember thinking that. And then the airplane started, the engine smoothed out again, and I went on home.
You're behind enemy lines, right, at the time?
Oh yeah, we're up very close to Graz in Austria. And so I went home, landed at Lucena. That was our home base. And the next airplane, let's see, that was the night, the 26th. I didn't get another one until the 12th of September. We were on a mission to Greece. And this has obviously got to be a milk run for the bombers, because the bombers are at 14,000 feet, about 10,000 feet lower than they normally are. And we are escorting him, and my squadron is flying this kind of a formation, 4, 4, 4, 4. We called it a box formation. And I don't know how to tell you, I'm the leader of the second flight, and I'm looking around and I noticed the guy ahead of me, not really sure, he sort of kicked his tail or did something, but I knew he had seen something. So I immediately looked around, and right down there were 2 Ju-52s. That's a 3-engine German transport. Well, first thing I did was drop tanks and start down. Boy, I tell you, talking about counting your chickens before they're hatched. I think I've got the jump on everybody, that everybody is still there looking around for an airplane, and I'm on my way down. So I look back up there, and it's amazing. I see 3, 3, 3, 3, and I look around, and guess what? Here's 4 P-51s like we're in formation, and we're all diving down. Well, now I figure out, how am I going to get these two before these guys get them? Well, I think I'm going to make a head-on pass, and I realize, oh my, the head-on pass will be doing 600 miles an hour, and I get one chance, and if you miss, you've missed. So instead I decided I'm going to come down, chop my power, and make a turn to enough G's that I'm almost blacking out, which is what I did. I came down, made a high G turn, and I come up behind the second Ju-52. I open fire. I see one hit on his left tire, and he blew up. So there must have been some other hits that I couldn't see. He blew up, and he went right on down, and he hit right exactly where the water met. This was over water, but where the water met the beach, he hit right there. Well, I keep motoring up on the second one, who's about a half a mile ahead of him, and I opened fire on him, and about that time, a 51 comes in front of me so close, I think I have had a mid-air collision. And I pull the stick back, and I go up to like about 700 or 800 feet, and of course now all the anti-aircraft guns on the field are looking upon me with favoritism, you know. And I suddenly realized, my God, the airplane is still flying, so I dive back on down. We get back to the base at Lucena, and I put my claim in for 2 Ju-52s, and I hear a voice say, all right, I think I got that second one. And I look around, and it's John Simmons. And I said, well, hell, I didn't see any of your bullets hit him. I said, all I saw was my bullets. And he said, well, all I saw was my bullets. So we didn't give credit for a half victory, whole victory, or nothing. And if you thought you had one, and I thought I had the same one, we would flip a coin for it. And so we're getting ready to flip a coin, and John says, well, look, I'm leaving in a week. This is probably the last time I'm going to have a chance to get a victory, and you got 6 months yet. We know you got the first one. Why don't you let me have the second one? And I thought about it, and I think, well, good Lord, we're in all these fights together where we depend on one another. It seemed only fair. And so I let him have the second victory. Then I've got one. Now, I didn't see another enemy airplane until the 15th of October. 15th of October is a strafing mission, supposedly going to be from north of Budapest to Vienna along the Danube River. Well, it's a solid overcast, almost solid. When we got up to where we think Budapest is, we couldn't see any place to go, and all of a sudden somebody spotted a hole. So we went into our finger formation, and all 4 flights we went down through that hole. Let me tell you, in retrospect, we shouldn't have been there. The clouds were anywhere from 200 to 900 feet, and the visibility at the best was a half a mile. And the thing that bothered me was, at that low altitude, if the lead guy ran into some high tension wires, the chances are several more of us would too. I have to tell you, I was very apprehensive, and I was looking around all the time, and I looked over here, and like that, I saw an airplane, a big airplane, in a break in the clouds. And I think, that's a B-17. What's he doing down here? So I immediately slipped out of the formation and started after him. And 10 seconds later, my wingman says, hey, Art, where are you going? And I said, well, I thought I maybe saw something. Of course, by this time, I certainly did see something. It was a twin-engine airplane. And as I'm pulling up to him, I clearly recognized it's a Heinkel 111. It's got that distinctive notch in the bottom of the rudder. And I think, I don't see any markings. And the Russians, we've been briefed by intelligence that the Russians had an airplane that looked similar to the 111. So now I'm in a dilemma. I know it's a 111, but I don't know whether it's a look-alike Russian 111 or not. So I pull up to this guy. Oh, let me tell you, I can't be more than 5 feet away from his tail, and I'm looking to see if I can see any numbers or writing on the tail, which I don't. So I'm getting ready to go up and see if I can see any writing on the side of his airplane, and about that time the top turret gunner whips his machine gun down and opens fire on me. A decision was made for me, so I immediately opened fire, and I am so close. The whole cockpit where the rear gunner was in disappeared, and my bullets went over to the left engine, hit the left engine, but it didn't catch fire, and then I brought the guns across the cockpit into the right engine, and the right engine did start, there was fire coming out of it, but now you realize we're like, we were probably at 500 or 600 feet, and he went down and crashed. Well, as I start up through the overcast, I suddenly realized I don't have any airspeed. And I realized that the gunner had hit me. And so I just used my artificial horizon and climb speed, and I climbed up, went home, got to Lucena. You don't normally land a P-51 with no airspeed. And I'm waiting to see if anybody is coming back with me. And I'm all alone. So I decide, well, I'm going to go ahead and try it anyway. So I came in and made one of the best landings I ever made. And I'm going down the runway like this, and as I'm coming toward the end, I put my brakes on, except I don't have any brakes. They go like this. Now at the end of our runway there's a road, and the trucks and everything all stop until you've landed, and then they start. So I'm screaming to the tower, stop the traffic, I don't have any brakes. And the tower said, we don't have any communication with them. So as I'm getting toward the end of the runway, I'm still doing about 60 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour. And I have to tell you, I certainly didn't want to run into the trucks like that. So I kicked the rudder and hit the power and do a ground loop, partially off of the runway and partially on. Well, I'm sitting there thanking the good Lord that I made it safely, and a staff car comes up, and a lieutenant colonel jumps on my wing and says, what the hell do you think you're doing? And I said, well, I don't have no brakes. My hydraulic system is shot up. And I said, I shot a German bomber down. No, I'm sorry. He said, what happened? Something like, what happened? And I said, a bomber shot me up. And he said, did you get him? And I said, yeah, I did. Pats me on the shoulder, off he goes. That was my 7th victory. I don't see another airplane until the 20th of January. We are doing a escort mission. We're hitting Regensburg, but this is Regensburg, and to confuse the German, we went up to Prague and then turned and came back on down. Well, our squadron, the 317th, we were split up. My 8 airplanes that I had originally, we were taking the last part of the bombers. Then my flight leader behind me tells me that his heating system is completely out. Now this is the 20th of January, and in Northern Europe in the winter time the stratosphere often comes down to the high 20s, and we're at 30,000 feet. So he's literally freezing. I mean, actually freezing. So he wants me to go down, and I tell him I can't escort going down. So he leaves me, and I've now got 4 airplanes. And I come to the end of the bomber stream, like this, and I'm going to come around here and go up this side and down. I didn't like to do the over the bombers like that because I had been shot at too many times by the gunners who would think we were German airplanes. So I did the racetrack pattern. As I got down here, I looked over around here and I spotted another box of B-17s. I'm guessing they were 10 miles behind, I don't know. But the long and the short is, I went ahead and let them come up so that I'm going to be escorting them also. As I turn around behind them, I look up, and here's a stream of Focke-Wulfs from 2 o'clock high to 11 o'clock. They're attacking this last box of bombers. About the only thing I had time to do was say, "This is it, drop tanks." And we immediately started, well, we're going toward them. About this time, they must have seen us when we dropped the tank, because now they all start towards us. I shouldn't tell you this. I didn't know what to do except stick my head down below the cowling and shoot my machine gun, because there were so many of them I couldn't believe it. Well, as we crossed one another, making head-on passes, 2 of them crossed slightly above me, and I pulled up to the chandelle behind the second one and opened fire. Do you remember I told you that above 30,000 feet there wasn't enough oxygen? Well, I also found out that time that if you apparently hit the gas-air mixture above a half-empty tank, you create a hell of an explosion. And this guy blew up, and I couldn't believe it. He was completely enveloped in flame with no smoke, no black smoke coming off of him. Well, when you hit an airplane and you're on his tail and he explodes, the illusion is that he stops, his airplane stops flying and comes down. Let me tell you, it was kind of close. I pulled up, just missed him, and I was going after the leader, but the leader had already gone inverted and was starting down. We now have a comedy of errors. My wingman said, "I kept telling you to turn tighter, turn tighter." He said there were 2 Focke-Wulfs on my tail. And what we didn't know was he had lost his alternator and battery. He had no way of firing his guns. He couldn't drop his tanks, and he had no radio equipment. So he thinks he's telling me to turn tighter, and I'm not responding. So finally he said, when I saw the bottom of the Focke-Wulfs, and I knew they were going to lead on me, I rolled over and did a split S. And he tells me that he saw 450 miles an hour with his wing tanks on now. 450 miles an hour. He must have been very low to have seen that, because you know the true airspeed in high altitude. Anyway, the other guy that's leading my element is a gentleman by the name of Miller. His wingman is Hansen. Miller did the same thing I did. He pulled up behind a guy, hit him, and the guy went over, started spinning, and he followed him down. I gotta go back. When we got back to Lucena, I estimated there were 40 Focke-Wulfs. The other 3 people estimated 75. And so when he follows the guy he shot down, he's very lucky that a half a dozen didn't tack onto his tail and shoot him down. I can't really criticize him because that's the same damn thing that I did on my first victory. Anyway, he followed the guy all the way down. They ran into an overcast. He went through the overcast, and as he's starting to get ready to go home, a focke-wulf comes out right in front of him in the overcast. And all I had to do was squeeze my trigger, and that guy got done. And he's looking around at the guy where he hit and going for home, and guess what? Another focke-wulf came out ahead of him. So he motored up behind him and shot him down. This is his first combat victories, and he got 3 of them. In the meantime, his wingman, Hansen, when we made our head-on passes, his engine stopped. You remember I said, drop tanks, this is it? Well, he dropped his tanks and forgot to switch to internal fuel. So he said, my engine stopped, and I immediately think I've been shot up, so I roll over and I start down, diving away from the fight. And he said, I got down to about 25,000 feet, and I suddenly realized I hadn't turned my gas engine inside the airplane. He said I did. The airplane started up, and I climbed back up to the side of the fight and climbed up to 37,000 feet. And I said, well, why in the hell didn't you come down and help me? He said, well, I didn't see you. I saw nothing but black crosses. In the meantime, as I told you, all the other 3 people in the flight are gone, and I'm down. Well, I'm not down. I'm up there with the rest of them. You know, the only thing that saved my life was the fantastic ability of the Mustang, and I'm sure that some of these pilots must have been not top-notch pilots, because there's no way one pilot can stop 40 other pilots from going on and attacking the bombers or shooting you down. Again, I stayed with them quite a while. I'm sure I was up there about 5 minutes, but every time I would start to pull into the tail of one, I'd do the same thing that High Sheridan said, look around me, and here's anywhere from 2 to 4 coming on my tail. So now I got to maneuver out of that one, and I never got a shot from behind at one. I made a couple of head-on passes. I don't think I got anything. They didn't get me. And after a while, I realized I was inordinately lucky, and this couldn't keep on for very long. So there's 2 focke-wulfs ahead of me, and they're heading south, and I'm coming up, I'm going to get a shot at them, and they suddenly do the mousetrap. They each turn like 30 degrees, and they go this way. If you go after this one comes on your tail, and they can also do the head-on passes. Well, when I saw them pull off the 30 degrees, I think this is a no-win situation, which either one, if I take a shot at either one of them, the other one's going to get me. So I decided it was time to go home, and for the first time in my combat, I pushed the throttle through what we called isn't that interesting? We were able to pull 5 inches more power by going through the safety wire, and for the first time in combat, I pushed it through, and I climbed up, and I got above these 2 guys and started for home. It's pretty hard. I was faster than they were. It's pretty hard for me to know exactly how many chased me, but from looking back and checking every time, it was at least 12 or 15 followed me. And when I later talked with a German fighter pilot, he explained that this was the Focke-Wulf 190D model, and they had seen how it did against the 51 at low altitude, but he said this was an opportunity for them to check how well they could do against me at 30,000 feet. And he said that's why they probably didn't attack the bomber. They wanted to see what they could do against you. Anyway, they followed me all the way down to slightly south of Munich, and the next time I looked behind me, there was nobody there. And so that was my 8th victory. That was the 20th of January. I only flew one more mission, 5th or 7th of February, and then I went home.
Wow. Fascinating stories. Okay. Soon after that, this was in February. Soon after that, the war was over. First week in May, right?
Yes.
So what happens after the war?
Yeah. When I came home, I had, let's see, we had 10 days of leave. I went down to Miami where they do the assignment of where you're going to go. And I was told I was going to go to a P-51 outfit at Punta Gorda, and I'd be an instructor there. And I agreed with that. Later it turned out that a general who was a bomber pilot had a second lieutenant for a co-pilot. Second lieutenant wanted to fly fighters, so he came to assignment and said, I want you to send this man to fighters. And I had taken up the last fighter slot. So I got bumped, and they put a second lieutenant who's never flown fighters in my position to go to Punta Gorda to teach other people how to fly the 51.
Wow.
I was really dissatisfied. The guy told me I could go to Selma, Alabama and fly P-40s. And I said, my God, P-40s, that's what we flew off of the carrier on in 42. And he said, well, that's the best I can do for you. I got there to Selma, Alabama, and the personnel officer said, you flew P-40s in North Africa? And I said, no, we were flying P-47 51s. And he said, did you fly the P-40s in combat? I said, no. He said, well, you can't fly P-40s here. Our instructors in P-40s have combat time. So I said, well, what do you expect you're going to do with me? He said, well, we're going to make you the squadron commander of the instrument squadron. And I said, no, you're not. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be sitting there and let some cadet spin me in. And he says, well, there's nothing else we can do with you. So we left on a kind of a hostile situation again. A couple of nights later, I'm in at the officers' club. I get my dinner there, go up to the bar for a drink, and I see some guys in their flight suit, and they got the P-40 emblems here. And I said, went over and introduced myself and told them that we had originally flown the P-40s off of the carrier. And I said, what outfit were you guys with? And the guy said, we weren't with any. He said, we've been here at Selma, Alabama all the time. And I said, you mean to tell me you don't have combat time in the P-40s? He said, no. Well, guess where I went the next morning at 8 o'clock? I get the personnel officer and I tell him about my experience. And he said, well, these guys have been instructing in P-40s or instructing in AT-6s for 3 years, and we had to reward them. They wanted to fly fighters, so we let them fly P-40s. So I said, well, here I am, an ace, 8 victories, 300 and plus hours of combat time, and you're telling me that I can't instruct the P-40s, but people who've never been in combat can. He said, well, that's the way the commander wants it. Well, another hostile situation. So a couple of days later, I get a call to come over there, and they said, we have an opening for a pilot to go to Chinook and be in charge of the proficiency flying from the students going to school. Well, my goodness, Chinook's 130 miles from Chicago. That's where Ellen is. So I said, I'll take it. And then if you remember or you heard about it, the point system came out at the end of the war, Europe. The point system came out, and if you had 80 points, 85 points, you could get out of the service. Well, I had 185, so guess what I did? I got out of the service. And that took me to June of 45.
So you stayed in 1 year after the war, basically.
Well, it really wasn't. The war ended in Europe on the 8th of May of 45, and the war went on, as you know, in Japan until August, when we dropped the nukes. So
almost a year after the end of the war, both sides, Europe and Japan, you decided to get out of the Air Force.
Well, I almost went back in. Helen and her father and my grandfather insisted that I go to college because of the GI Bill. And I really wasn't too keen on it. But I agreed to do it. And 1947, I received a call from a former member of the Checkertails, 325th, and he said, we'd like to recall you to active duty. And I said, well, I'd really like to do that, except I'm going to college. And so we stayed 2 years going to Navy Pier in Chicago, and then we went down 2 years to Urbana, Illinois. And I have to tell you that if it wasn't for my wife, we could not have finished college. She went out, and out of the clear blue became a plastic goods demonstrator. They sold the plastic goods to maybe 10 or 12 women. We wouldn't have had enough money to spend 2 years in Urbana. The government gave me $130. I paid $35 a month for living in a barracks, converted to family quarters, and we didn't have any extra money saved up. So if it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't have had a college education. So I went to mechanical engineering. I graduated in June of 1950, started to work for General Motors, and on the 4th of October, I was recalled to the Air Force. Now, at the end of April or May of 50, 2 majors had come down from the Pentagon and wanted me to come back into the Air Force. And the memory of how I was treated at Selma, couldn't fly. I just said, hell no, I'm never coming back to the Air Force. They talked a little while longer, and one of the guys said, I see you're an ace. I said, yeah, I am. He said, what if I could guarantee you F-86s? Would you be willing to come back in? I said, where do I sign? And so I volunteered to come back in with the understanding I was flying F-86s. When I got recalled the 4th of October, I was sent to Enid, Oklahoma, Vance Air Force Base. And I come in and I see the sign that says Advanced Twin Engine Flying School. I check into personnel and I said, where are the F-86s? He said, what? I said, the F-86s, where have you got those? And he says, sir, this is a twin engine multi-advanced flying school, multi-engine. And I said, oh, I'm in the wrong place. I said, I'm supposed to be going to F-86s. So we call all up the line, and believe it or not, I get the guy in the Pentagon who has assigned me to Enid. And we're talking on the telephone, personnel officer, me and him. And I said, look, you got me in the wrong places. I agreed to come back in because I was promised F-86s. And he says, yeah, but he said, that was, you were voluntarily coming back in. We decided to recall you involuntarily, and we can send you anywhere we want, and we want you to be at Enid, Oklahoma. So I thought, well, the screwing goes on ad infinitum. But I have to tell you, we had a fabulous time at Enid. I got promoted to major. I had 4 years and 2 months service, and I knew that had to be a mistake, but it wasn't. And let's see, we were there 53. I had a chance. They needed a major with mechanical.
What airplane were you flying at Enid?
Pardon?
What airplane were you flying at Enid?
Well, I started out flying the T-28. I had to go down to Selma, Alabama, and take the instructor's course. I was the assistant flight commander at Enid, and after about 2 months, they had a problem with the people running the instrument school, and apparently I was the only one that had been to the instrument school in Bryant, Texas. So I was called in and said, would you be willing to take over the instrument school? And I said, yeah, of course. So I got that job. See, I got the instrument school. I got the job of taking all the people that were being recalled to active duty. I had about 4 people working for me. We had to bring them up their proficiency that they could once again start flying. I got base operations under me. I flew they had a C-47, a AT-7, AT-11. I guess that was, oh, the other thing I did with, we had these T-28s, and the T-28s that we got had a problem with a sudden engine stoppage. The engine stops and the prop takes off for who knows where. And of course they become T-28 gliders. We had, gosh, we must have had 80 or 90 of them, and I was made the project officer of getting them all down to San Antonio Kelly Field. I don't know whatever they did with them, but we got them all down there. Now, when I went to Germany, Helen came over and joined me about 3 months after I got there. There was no housing before that. We went to Landstuhl and Ramstein. The two are adjacent bases there. And this is where I told you before, who wants a major in the organization when you've got a lot of captains you're hoping to promote to major, and this guy comes in and takes over a slot from you. So they decided, since I had had some experience at Chinook Field with this proficiency flying, they decided that I was going to become the squadron commander of a yet unnamed squadron, because there was no squadron designation. And my job was primarily to get proficiency flying, the 110 hours for pilots each year. And I had an unbelievable number of different types in airplane. I had 6 L5s, 17 L20s. It varied between 18, 19 C-47s. Did I mention the T-33s? I had 17 T-33s. I had the 6 H-19 helicopter, a 54, a C-131, and a couple of VC-47s. We did a fabulous job. We never had to have a person go up in front of a flying safety board because he didn't get his flying time. And let's see, we were there. Well, I was supposed to go to the Air Force Command and Staff at Maxwell. I ended up being an alternate, and I ended up staying. They forgot about me somehow, and I ended up staying there like 4.5 years.
This is in Landstuhl?
And no, yes, in Landstuhl, that's right. And we came back, and they sent me to the 2047th Air and Airways Communications Service at Maxwell Field. The commander, Ross, ended up being promoted and sent to Hawaii, and guess what? The major, with all this time, I took over the organization. And I stayed there until like 1960, when I was sent to the Army Command and General Staff College at Leavenworth. From there, let's see, at Maxwell Field I flew the T-33 and the C-47, the C-45. And then when we went to the Leavenworth, all they had was 2 C-47s. After that, I was sent to the Ballistic Missiles Systems Division, which was right in LA here. I was in liquid and solid propulsion. That was my job. And then we started about 62, the Space Systems Division. And I was assigned there, and my job was Chief of Launch Vehicle Planning Service and Maneuverable Spacecraft. A very challenging job. I had about 57 aerospace people that theoretically worked for me. They were assigned to me, but Art Greenberg over in aerospace was managing them. But we had a lot of interesting experiences. I at one time thought we were going to be selected to make a maneuverable spacecraft. You know, once you get the spacecraft up there, they wanted it to be able to maneuver. Well, NASA whipped that away from us. Anyway, that was a real nice assignment. From there I went to Japan, where I flew the C-130As, 17 days a month down in Vietnam. We were in Japan for 3.5 years. After I finished there, I went to Electronic Systems Division in Boston. I was Director of Operations. I was now a colonel. And let's see, we stayed there about 2.5 years, almost 3, and I was sent to, the last assignment I was sent to was the Richards-Gebaur, the Air Force Communications Service, and I was called Director of Program Control. And we decided to retire from there because we wanted to get to California, and they wanted me to go back further east, so that was it. I retired in July of 1975.
What an amazing career. Colonel, can you tell us a little bit about your family?
My family? Yes, I have my wife, Helen. She was born 6 months ahead of me. We met in high school. We got engaged to her last year of high school. She was 1 year behind me. And I told you we got married on December 14th of 1943. We've been married over 70 years. We had 4 children, 1 girl, 3 boys. Unfortunately, our girl had Crohn's disease, and we lost her just before her 40th birthday. But we've got 2 of the boys living within 20 minutes of us, one in Ojai, one in Camarillo, and the 3rd one lives over in Nevada, Mesquite. I can't tell you how many grandchildren and great-grandchildren I got. I have to count them up, but I think it's 7 of each. And actually, one of our granddaughters just had another baby in Phoenix, so it's probably now 8 great-grandchildren. And I can't help telling you that we lost 400,000 people dead and millions that were injured in World War II. And we all, I better not say we all, but most of us were gung-ho to do our part.
Well, you certainly did your part. Colonel Fiedler, thank you so very much for sharing with us and for posterity your stories of being a fighter pilot with 8 kills, 1 probable, and maybe a couple of others. You had an amazing career over the course, let me think, about 28 years, something like that. And we thank you for sharing those stories with us. This recording and the documents that you have provided us with us, those will be archived with the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Fine, and I thank you.
Thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for your service.
You're welcome, sir.